Making headlines for this week of December the 2nd. Political earthquake. Italians reject Senate reform, the leader, and deal a blow to the EU. Standing tall at Standing Rock. A win this week raises hopes, although challenges remain. Exposing the ESF. History of secretive banking group is brought into the light. And mind over matter. Science affirms how collective consciousness can unite.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. For those who may remember a musician from the 80s named Meatloaf, a song of his may sum up events from this past weekend. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. The weekend of December 1st to 3rd was to bring the events that had the potential to determine if the global cabal is still fully in control, or if perhaps the will of the people was beginning to turn the tables. At this point, it would seem that the will of the people may be starting to gain steam and take hold. We start first with what some may consider to be the unfortunate news. In a rerun presidential election in Austria on December 4th, the results are bringing the union's first president with links to a Green Party. According to The Local, an English news site in Austria, Austrian voters resoundingly rejected anti-immigration and Eurosceptic Norbert Hofer's bid to become the European Union's first far-right president, a result greeted with relief from centrist politicians across the continent. Greens-backed independent candidate Van der Bellen swept 53.3% of Sunday's vote against 46.7% for his rival from the anti-immigration Freedom Party, according to public television projections. The article added that establishment politicians in Austria and Europe had been nervous about a possible Hofer victory in a year that has seen 2 monumental political upsets already, those being the US election and the British Brexit vote. The role of the Austrian president is largely ceremonial, but there had been fears that a Hofer victory would embolden other anti-establishment forces ahead of elections next year in France, Germany, and the Netherlands. The relief across Europe was palpable on Sunday evening, with German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier calling the outcome a good omen against populism in Europe. Van der Bellen has stated that he vows to be a president for all Austrians. Hofer appeared to be on track with his message against the elitists, but in my observation, and it may not be correct, that his defeat came because of his belief that Islam and Muslims are somehow responsible for what is going on. With the German foreign minister stating a win against populism, there is also the unfortunate stance that Hofer has taken on key issues. Austria is one of the countries that has been bitterly affected with the cabal-created refugee crisis that has seen many European countries being pushed to a breaking point. I have elaborated on this previously, stating that this appears to be a strategy to destabilize Europe in order to justify the expansion of NATO to stop what the West calls Russian aggression. With both Moldova and Bulgaria having recently elected new leaders with a more anti-US and anti-Western banking attitude, we move down to Italy now, where a political earthquake has now hit the country. To back up just a bit, Reuters news service first reported in December of 2015 that the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi had called a national referendum on constitutional reform. At that time, Reuters wrote that Renzi has piled political capital into a bill to effectively abolish the upper house Senate as an elected chamber. Renzi says this will make the country more governable, but his critics say it reduces democratic checks and balances. It will cut the number of senators by 2/3 and strip the Senate of its ability to bring down a government and sharply limit its scope to block legislation. At that time, Renzi was riding a wave of popularity, and the leader was so confident that he was willing to risk his political future on the referendum. He had been quoted at the time that he would consider his career in government a failure if the vote went against him. In what may seem a rather surprising article coming from CNN, Charles Riley reported on December 1st that first there was Brexit and then the US election. Will Italy deliver the next shock to the political establishment? Riley added that the referendum could, in one nightmare scenario, force the Prime Minister's resignation, spark a banking crisis, and ultimately push Italy out of the Eurozone. It may not be only the particular legislation that is turning people against the government. Riley noted that Italian politics would be plunged into disarray by a no vote on the constitutional reforms. The chief beneficiaries would likely be populist parties that have capitalized on anger over an economy that's been stuck in neutral for the past decade. Fast forward to this past weekend, and the winds of change are sweeping through Italy. Euronews reported on December 5th that Matteo Renzi is to resign following a heavy defeat in Sunday's constitutional reform referendum. Although ostensibly on plans to streamline Parliament, the poll was largely seen as a confidence vote in the leader. Renzi announced his intention to quit in an address to the nation. Most opposition parties were against, with the anti-establishment five-star movement leading the way, tapping into a strong populist mood, as you heard moments ago. The party, whose head is Beppe Grillo, wants a referendum on whether Italy should keep the euro. Renzi's actions may have been seen by the people as a necessary thing, but they appear to have seen that his actions were for the wrong reasons. In rejecting Renzi, people believed that his choice to reduce the powers of the Senate and make cuts was merely another way for cabal interests to get around the democratic process in the country because the system of checks and balances would be compromised. RT's Paula Slyer, in speaking with voters, was quoted as saying in an RT article that the mainstream media is likely to present this as a personal defeat, a vote of non-confidence against Renzi and against the leadership. But it should be seen as a much more symbolic vote. It is also a vote against the European Union, against the EU policies, and against the EU establishment. Beppe Grillo, leader of the Five-Star Movement Party, was quoted in the RT article as saying that times have changed. Sovereignty belongs to the people. Now we are starting to really apply our Constitution. The main winners are the citizens who raised their heads and went to vote en masse, forgetting about the TV and newspapers to reject the constitutional reform. RT added that Rome's first female mayor, Virginia Raggi, who hails from Grillo's Five-Star Movement, welcomed the no result, saying that our revolution does not stop in Rome and in Italy. Speculation has begun about where and how things may move forward from this point. A Euronews article on December 5th has observed 5 potential knockdown effects from this result as being: number 1, fresh elections based on Renzi's promise to resign if he lost. Number 2, a referendum on the euro. This becomes a possibility if Grillo's Five-Star Movement Party were to gain even greater popularity and a possible win in an election in the wake of this result. Number 3, a fresh banking crisis. Italy's banks are battling a burden of bad debt, loans that are unlikely to be repaid. On top of that, government debt as a percentage of gross domestic product is the second highest in the Eurozone after Greece. Renzi's resignation saw the euro fall to a 20-month low against the dollar, with markets worried that instability in the Eurozone's third-largest economy could reignite a dormant financial crisis and deal a hammer blow to Italy's fragile banking sector. Number 4, back to coalition governance. Italy's new electoral law, which made majority governments rather than coalitions more likely, could now be revised in light of the referendum result. And number 5, a shot in the arm for Eurosceptics. Whether it's Brexit, the US election, or Renzi's referendum defeat, one thing is almost certain in the hours after a defeat for the establishment. France's far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, will send a congratulatory note on Twitter. Stephanie Kirschengessner, writing for the London Guardian on November 30th, notes how the Yes camp has the support of primarily those who have business ties or interests. The No camp is against the removal of the democratic checks and balances that may allow governments to continue stripping people of their rights and freedoms, a trait that is increasingly common within countries still having any control by the global cabal. Seema Moody, writing for CNBC on November 23rd, had noted that HSBC warned in a note to clients after the U.S. election that a global surge in anti-establishment feeling, exemplified by the UK referendum and the US election, could embolden populist views already widespread in Italy. The elevated political risk in the country is starting to get priced into stocks and bonds. So far this year, the Italian benchmark, the FTSE MIB, is down roughly 23% compared with the Stoxx Europe 600 index, which has fallen about 7%. The losses are most visible in Italian banks with Unicredit, Unione di Banche Italiane, Banca Popolare di Milano, and Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, all down more than a whopping 60% so far this year. Euronews reported on November 29th that the European Central Bank is ready to temporarily step up purchases of Italian government bonds if the result of the referendum sharply drives up borrowing costs for the Eurozone's largest debtor. This according to central bank sources talking to Reuters. With such a poor economy, numerous Eurosceptic parties have risen up, but, much to the concern of global elitists, there really is not another center-leaning party option. There were really only two choices in Italy, Renzi's way or the highway out of the EU, and the people seem to have made their choice abundantly clear. In other geopolitical news, the third thing this past weekend to occur that has brought another win by the people, it has taken place at Standing Rock. With more on this, we have this report from National Public Radio.
The Army Corps of Engineers announced yesterday it will not approve a building permit for the key and final section of the Dakota Access Pipeline.
And this news is being welcomed, as you could expect, as a huge victory for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and all of their supporters. For its part, Energy Transfer Partners, this is the company that is building the pipeline, they call the move, quote, an overt and transparent political action by an administration which has abandoned the rule of law. This $3.8 billion project is designed to transport 500,000 gallons of oil per day. And let's bring in NPR's Nathan Rott, who joins us from the site where protesters have been camped out for a long time now. Nate, good morning.
Good morning.
So what does this decision mean for this pipeline exactly?
So what the Army Corps did was say that it would not approve an easement for that key part of the pipeline where it crosses the Missouri River. It's actually not far from where I am now. Instead, the Army Corps said it would look at alternate routes for the pipeline and would conduct a full environmental impact statement on their findings. So what that means in the immediate sense is that the Dakota Access Pipeline is not going to be completed anytime soon. That's not to say it won't be completed. The Army Corps could very well determine that this is actually the best place for the pipeline to go. The Trump administration could act to speed things up. And I think it's important to bear in mind that this pipeline that we're talking about is more than 90% complete. Billions of dollars of construction have been spent on it. So it's really unlikely that Energy Transfer Partners, the company building it, is going to just reroute this thing without a fight.
Very important point you made there. I mean, we are going to have a different president very soon. I mean, this is a decision from President Obama, who is leaving office. Donald Trump coming in could make a very different decision. This fight could go on. So how are people reacting right now?
Well, all across the board. I mean, as you said, this is a huge victory for the tribe. It's a huge victory for the environmental organizations who have been fighting not just against this pipeline, but others. It's a huge win for indigenous peoples. This has grown to be a movement about sovereignty and consultation as much as it is about a pipeline and environmental issues. There's more than 100 Native American tribes that are represented here at this camp that I'm at to protest the construction. And for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, who have been at the heart of this protest to protect their water, it's really big. Let's hear from their tribe's chairman, David Archambault.
An environmental impact statement is a big statement that says we're no longer going to ignore the original people of this country.
Now, on the other side of all this is the energy and infrastructure industries and a number of Republican lawmakers. The Midwest Alliance for Infrastructure Now didn't mince its words in a statement, saying the decision was a rejection of the entire regulatory and judicial systems. North Dakota's governor called it a serious mistake. And here's the state's representative, Kevin Kramer.
Today's unfortunate decision sends a chilling signal to others who want to build infrastructure in this country.
Okay, Kramer there, a Republican congressman from North Dakota who's been in favor of this pipeline. God, it sounds like people on both sides really making this much more than just about a pipeline. I mean, talking about indigenous people, talking about, halting building infrastructure in the entire country. So a lot at stake here. But, Nate, what about this camp? I mean, we've seen so many images and heard so many voices from this camp that has grown around this pipeline site.
Yeah, I was here yesterday when the announcement was kind of leaked out. It spread around in whispers at first, and then people started shouting it and cheering. And that said, I was honestly a little surprised that people weren't as excited as I thought they might be. There was that cheering and whooping, and there was some fireworks throughout the night, and yes, believe me, people have been up here all night. Mm-hmm. But most of the people I talked to have been pretty reserved. They felt like the announcement was great, but they know that this by no means is a knockout punch. People know that a Trump administration is coming up, and they know he has spoken openly about his support for the pipeline. And some of the people I talked to, like Ali Gaddis, a native from Colorado, who we're going to hear from in just a second, was upset about how long it took for this announcement to happen.
Actually, I lost a lot of respect for Obama because he waited so long. And a lot of people got hurt in order for him to come to this decision that he could have made a long time ago.
And I mean, she is one person among many out there, Nate, and people are saying, as this decision keeps going, they're going to be staying out there. And it's really going to get cold in North Dakota.
Yeah, believe you me, I'm sleeping in the back of my rental car right now. And,
oh, wow.
I could use a little more down in my sleeping bag.
It's not cold.
Yeah, it's cold. But, to answer your question, yes, people have been here for months. People are going to continue to stay here. I haven't talked to a single person since this announcement was made that has said, hey, that's it. All right, fight's over. Let's go. Everybody knows that a Trump administration could be a game changer in this situation. And so everybody's going to stay.
Okay.
Leaving really isn't an option.
As you heard, it represents a win in one sense, although there are still challenges. Even if the pipeline is rerouted, this does not necessarily guarantee water safety. There is still the battle about corporate oil in general, and why a polluting source of energy is still being exploited when sufficient technologies are emerging to move a country away from dependence on drilling for oil. You heard that the possibility of Trump coming in to overturn the ruling. There is a still unconfirmed report that an alleged deadline on January 1st would allow investors to withdraw if oil was not flowing by that time. Energy Transfer Partners has apparently stated that this is not true. This, however, has not stopped at least one bank from reconsidering its participation in the project, and this help came from the indigenous people of northern Norway. Alexis Bonagovsky, writing for Truth Out on November 28th, reported on how indigenous activists in Norway helped convince a large national bank to withdraw its support. She writes on the following. On November 8th, Beaska Nilas, chairman of the Norwegian Sami Association, walked into a conference room in Oslo, Norway, with his wife, Sarah Marielle Gaup Beaska, who had spent time in Standing Rock. Both are members of the Sami Parliament, and Beaska is a member of the Norwegian Society of the Conservation of Nature. Nilas and Beaska flew over 1,000 miles from their home in Finnmark, the homelands of the indigenous Sami people, and the most northern province of Norway, located above the Arctic Circle. Nilas set up a meeting with executives at the DNB, Norway's largest bank, to demand that they withdraw their investment in the Dakota Access Pipeline. In his hands was a 20-page report documenting the human rights abuses that members of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and their allies have experienced at the hands of the state of North Dakota and Dakota Access Pipeline's private security firm. The report came unexpectedly from a law school graduate who had been at Standing Rock and was developing a legal infrastructure to support the tribe and its allies. Nilas was quoted as saying that there were 4 people, big shots, in a big company. None of us knew what to expect. They seemed confident at the start, and then uncomfortable as we started talking about what was happening at Standing Rock. By the end, I could see they realized the severity of the situation that they were in. The article also added that shortly after that meeting on November 17th, DNB sold off $3 million in assets. Although the bank is still responsible for offering the pipeline companies hundreds of millions of dollars in credit, about 10% of the credit needed for the project, Sami activists are confident this is just the start of complete divestment of Nordic countries from the pipeline. And they recently scored yet another victory. On November 24th, Odin Fund Management, a major fund manager in Norway, also announced that it sold $23.8 million worth of shares that were invested in the companies that are a part of the Dakota Access Pipeline. One possible reason for the seemingly sudden turn of events may have had something to do with the arrival of thousands of military veterans who have answered the call to defend the country from enemies foreign and domestic. Reuters reported on December 2nd that the veterans were building barracks to help shield the water protectors from the weather. An article on the Counter Current News website on December 5th noted that thousands of U.S. veterans have boots on the ground at the Standing Rock protest, many more than expected. Tim King, former editor of SalemNews.com, is there and heard that announcement. U.S. military veterans have been standing out front for a couple of days, with more of their brothers and sisters in arms arriving daily. No, they do not have weapons. The bitter cold has not chilled the passion behind stopping the pipeline. The many members of Veterans Stand for Standing Rock brought supplies such as gas masks, earplugs, and body armor to stand firm as a unit to protect water protectors from the police and their rubber bullets. More news will be forthcoming in the next newscast. In a few quick headlines for this week, a story the mainstream media has not picked up on is the starting of a People's Tribunal on the Iraq War, which began on November 30th. According to the Real News Network, Code Pink co-founder Jody Evans and attorney Inder Komar say Bush administration officials need to be held accountable for the deaths, costs, and violations of international law due to the 2003 invasion and subsequent occupation. Komar, who is an attorney, apparently has the only lawsuit against the former Bush administration. Komar was quoted as saying that we will hear from generals and members of the State Department to the media that perpetrated the lies and how they saw that happening, including an editor at Fox News, who is the editor to the White House, where he was told to push the lies, even though they knew they were lies. There'll be someone from the CIA who talked about how, at the CIA, they were told to drum up evidence that wasn't available. We will hear from soldiers and families of soldiers who were killed and who committed suicide. We will hear from people in cities, the cost to the cities, and it ends with Kiara Taylor of Dream Defenders exposing how these costs affect poverty, racism, Islamophobia, and the militarization of our cities. Comer added that he visited Standing Rock and witnessed what appeared to be military people with tanks. He noted that we want to show that it was lies that took us to war. It was an illegal, immoral, and unjust war, and the consequences, the costs of that war are innumerable. There are global and they are local. The tribunal was held December 1st and 2nd at the University of the District of Columbia Law School. About 6 months ago, a People's Inquiry in the UK, the Chilcot Inquiry, found that the former government of Tony Blair guilty of war crimes relating to the war in Iraq. Links to at least some of the coverage on this tribunal will be in the show summary for those choosing to view it. In Iceland, after failures of both the Independence Party and the Left Green Party to form a coalition government following the recent election there, The president has now invited the Pirate Party to try to form a government. According to a Reuters news article on December the 2nd, the anti-establishment Pirate Party, which came third in an October election, will continue talks with 4 other parties represented in Parliament: the Left Greens, Social Democrats, Bright Future, and the Reform Party. The Left Green Party was seeking to raise taxes to pay for education and social welfare. The challenge for Brigitte Jonsdotter, leader of the Pirate Party, is to come up with a strategy that allows her to meet the request of the Left Greens. Personally, if I was the leader of the Pirate Party, I would be proposing a campaign to grow massive amounts of hemp to create new green industries in Iceland, and selling the hemp would also generate the revenues that would pay for education and social welfare that the Left Greens want. This would provide the solution that could gain the coalition that the Pirate Party needs to potentially move forward in the creation of a successful government. In Korea, meanwhile, peaceful protests are continuing for the 6th straight weekend by the people who are demanding the resignation of Park Geun-hye. A bill has been introduced into Parliament calling for impeachment of the president. According to Reuters on December the 3rd, the march came after 3 opposition parties introduced a bill for Parliament to impeach Park, who could become the first democratically elected leader to leave office early in disgrace. The bill, signed by 171 members of the 300-seat unicameral assembly, said Park had violated the Constitution and criminal law by abusing her power in the influence peddling scandal. RT reported in December that 1.5 million people attended the protest in the nation's capital. Had this many people protested in the United States, one can be sure that the police and military would be using weapons against them. The parliamentary vote has been scheduled for December the 9th. In what may be considered a blow to both the UK and Sweden, but also more importantly an indirect blow to the US, RT has reported on November 30th that the United Nations has rejected a UK appeal against its previous ruling in favor of Julian Assange as inadmissible, thus requiring both London and Stockholm to end the WikiLeaks founder's arbitrary detention. Earlier this year, a case was concluded at the UN in which the body instructed the UK and Sweden to take immediate steps to ensure the WikiLeaks founder's liberty, protection, and enjoyment of fundamental human rights. The UK has appealed the ruling twice, with the UN rejecting its second appeal on Wednesday by pronouncing it not admissible. Justice for Assange reported, adding that the decision marks the end to London's attempt to overturn the ruling. RT added that earlier this month, Swedish investigators came to interview Assange inside the embassy concerning rape charges, with the whistleblower saying he has cooperated fully with them. The recent development in the Assange case at the UN forces the UK and Sweden, which are parties to his case, to immediately put an end to the detention and afford him monetary compensation. Justice for Assange stated, adding that a failure to do so would undermine the UN human rights protection system. An official release from Assange stated that, now that all appeals are exhausted, I expect the UK and Sweden will comply with their international obligations and set me free. He has described his political incarceration as being an obvious and grotesque injustice. Ashley Hoffman, writing for Inquisitor on November 30th, reported that Ecuadorian prosecutor Gallo Chiriboga told reporters that British police obtained a DNA sample from Assange, which could potentially be shipped to Sweden as prosecutors continue their investigation into the rape allegations, according to the Washington Times. Mr. Assange presented a document stating that he had already handed over a DNA sample to the British police. Therefore, Sweden will now have to request that DNA sample from the British police, said Chiriboga. In financial news, this week we begin a 5-part series on learning about the virtually unknown entity that is called the Exchange Stabilization Fund as part of the U.S. Treasury. Eric DeCarbonell has put together this series going back to 2012. In this broadcast, we listen now to parts 1 and 2 of the history of the Exchange Stabilization Fund.
The ESF is a super-secret Treasury operation and is the official channel for the Treasury's gold and foreign currency dealings. This means covert operations. The ESF is also virtually free of congressional control and has been used to pay a number of strange activities. It is the largest, most powerful financial agency in the world. Let's begin by reviewing the basics. First, the Exchange Stabilization Fund has been around a long while. It was created by the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 to protect the value of the dollar, and it does this by buying and selling foreign currency. For example, when the U.S. buys $1 billion in March intervention, it is the work of the Treasury's ESF. So the outcome of the inflation versus deflation debate that's been raging over the last few years really depends on this agency that most people have never even heard of. Number 2, ESF operations are conducted through the New York Fed. This means that the New York Fed executes the actual trading, handles the back office, documentation, etc. on the ESF's behalf. Basically, the ESF operates from within and controls the New York Fed. Let me give you an example to illustrate this important point. Here's a Wall Street Journal article from 1962. It shows how the New York Fed has been striving to stabilize the dollar as agent for the Exchange Stabilization Fund. In other words, a large part of the New York Fed staff work for the ESF defending the dollar. The New York Fed essentially is the ESF. So when the New York Fed lends $85 billion to AIG, and when New York Fed staff lament the inability to keep Congress in the dark about the details of that bailout, that is the ESF at work. Number 3, the Treasury's ESF controls international finance. What most people don't realize is that the Secretary of the Treasury is the Chief International Monetary Policy Official of the United States, and the ESF helps carry out these responsibilities. What this means is the Fed takes directions from the Treasury Department on international monetary affairs. So in the international arena, the Fed's independence is limited. The Treasury controls international finance, and the Fed does what it's told to do. Chairman Martin, the Fed's longest-serving chairman, confirms that anything done by the Federal Reserve must be coordinated with the Treasury through the Stabilization Fund. The absolutely key point here is that on any international matter, like establishing currency swaps with foreign central banks, bailing out international companies like AIG, and interventions in the currency market, the Treasury is in charge. To understand how important this is, think back to 2008 when McCain enjoyed a 5-point lead over Obama in the polls, and then the New York Fed let Lehman Brothers fail, which almost took down the entire financial system. The market crashed, and overnight the national dialogue turned almost entirely onto the economy. Obama's polling jumped, McCain dropped and never recovered. After the collapse in the fall of 2008, there was nothing the McCain campaign could do to win that election. The ESF's decision to let Lehman Brothers fail gave Obama the presidency. Number 4, the ESF keeps a low profile using the Fed as a front. It's not an accident that most people have never heard of the Exchange Stabilization Fund. The ESF is a slush fund that likes to operate in extreme secrecy. The ESF keeps a low profile by letting the Fed speak on its behalf and using the New York Fed to act on its behalf. The ESF also uses the phrase U.S. monetary authorities to keep its name out of the news. Of course, U.S. monetary authorities means the Federal Reserve and the ESF. So what happens is the Federal Reserve ends up with all the credit and the blame, and the ESF continues operating without anyone knowing it exists. One of the many reasons the ESF keeps a low profile is the fact that it's done a terrible job. Since the ESF was put in charge of defending the dollar's value, the greenback has been on a one-way track to worthlessness. Notice that for the period of time that the Federal Reserve was in charge of defending the dollar, it did its job. The dollar kept its value right up to the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, when all the Fed's powers were transferred to the Treasury's ESF. Hijacking the Fed. To understand how the Treasury took control of the Federal Reserve, we need to look at the congressional hearings held in 1934. The Gold Reserve Act was the most important bill to come before Congress since the Civil War, because it destroyed America's central bank. It fundamentally shifted responsibility from the Federal Reserve System to the Treasury in the only matters in which the control of the currency and credit really matter. Even before this bill, the Secretary of the Treasury was practically dominating the Fed. The Gold Reserve Act gave the Treasury the means to completely control the Federal Reserve. It gave the Secretary of the Treasury such powers of a permanent nature that he could nullify anything the Federal Reserve did. It nullified, if not scrapped, the Federal Reserve System. If you take away all the Fed's powers and gold, where will the Federal Reserve System stand? It utterly emasculated the fundamental idea of the Federal Reserve banking system. These quotes are not exaggerated. Here's a graph of short-term interest rates over the last 50 years. Now, the Federal Reserve supposedly sets short-term interest rates, right? Well, I've color-coded this graph with all the Secretary of the Treasuries for this time period, and it produces some interesting patterns. Notice how visibly the changes in Secretary of the Treasury affect interest rates, especially the trend in interest rates. Up, down, steady, down, up, steady, up, down, up, down. The Fed's independence is a myth. The Treasury has dominated the Federal Reserve through the ESF. Today, the Federal Reserve is a mere shadow of itself, a mechanism functioning as a clearing agency which has no control over anything important. Taking control of America's gold. Even the question of where the ESF got all its money is embarrassing. After confiscating all the gold in America, the Treasury devalued the dollar, creating a huge capital gain. This profit became the war chest of the Treasury, the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This visual history of the Fed shows how gold holdings were forbidden, then gold was revalued, and the profits put into the Exchange Stabilization Fund. A key point here is that the Treasury's ESF, through confiscation, took control of 3/4 of the world's monetary gold. The ESF was a guaranteed disaster, and people knew it back in 1934. Transferring all this power to a Secretary of the Treasury who has never had any banking experience, and giving the biggest borrower in the world the ability to inflate its debts away, is not smart. If this bill goes through this way, not even the President can control the ensuing inflation. If the stabilization fund should fail, we might be drifting towards a period of extreme inflation. While putting the Treasury in control of monetary policy was bad enough, even worse was the way the ESF was set up. Dictatorial power and no oversight. Section 10 of the Gold Reserve Act states that the sum of $2 billion will be deposited in the ESF under the exclusive control of the Secretary of the Treasury, whose decisions shall be final and not subject to review by any other officer of the United States. Handing that much money to one man is something that should have kept people up at night. The man does not live, never has lived, and never will live, who has the ability to single-handedly manage so large a fund. Furthermore, there was no limit to what the Secretary of the Treasury could do with that money. The bill's wording gave the Treasury unlimited authority to deal in almost anything. Worse still, because the ESF was conceived to operate in secret, Congress decided to never look at what it was doing. Since its creation in 1934, the ESF has operated with no congressional oversight whatsoever. Secrecy about what the government does with people's money is never healthy. The Gold Reserve Act centered in the hands of the Secretary of the Treasury dictatorial powers, far too much power to place in the hands of one man. And, as my great-grandfather Frank Vanderlip states, the Secretary of the Treasury would have a lot of things to do, and power to do them that a banker would not. The ESF begins financing covert operations. It didn't take long for the Treasury to abuse the ESF. In 1940, the Treasury started calling the Stabilization Fund its secret weapon, and the ESF began advancing large sums of money to China, Argentina, and other countries. These loans had nothing to do with stabilization. China needed help holding Japan back, and the handiest place to get the money was the Stabilization Fund. The ESF became America's secret weapon against the Axis during World War II. Not everyone was happy with this development. Most congressmen naively thought that the ESF would defend the dollar, and they were upset. Not that this mattered. The Secretary of the Treasury is under no obligations to comply with the general laws of the United States in handling the Stabilization Fund. Because of this, the ESF has been a source of funds for discretionary executive branch spending, the likes of which Congress has sought to prevent. The Iran-Contra scheme being a recent example. The ESF has a long history of credit operations. and the tables accessible on the Treasury's website give a history of ESF credit arrangements. As you can see, the ESF has been funding covert operations around the world for nearly 80 years. Notice that the 1941 loan to China is not used. In fact, nearly all the ESF's credit arrangements are not used. That's because the $50 million loan to China was closed in the complicated terms of international finance, and the United States lent nothing as far as the stabilization fund is concerned. And the $50 million loan to Argentina isn't even in the list. So what type of covert operations was the stabilization financing? Well, the man managing the operations of the ESF during World War II was Harry Dexter White. White wasn't a normal Treasury employee. He was given large authority in vast and sensitive government areas. White was the official Treasury representative on all kinds of committees. This list shows White's widespread governmental activities outside of the Treasury while he was managing the ESF. Of special note is the OSS Advisory Committee. The famous Office of Strategic Services was the counter-espionage and counter-propaganda agency of the government. It was America's first intelligence agency, a vast and chaotic organization of more than 12,000 people. The OSS carried out espionage and put out black propaganda. Now, black propaganda is nasty stuff, and the OSS concocted some of the blackest propaganda you ever heard, all financed by the Treasury's Stabilization Fund. The ESF designs the world's monetary system. Virtually no one is aware that the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Monetary System are ESF creations. Beginning in 1942, the Treasury began playing around with the idea of setting up an International Monetary Stabilization Fund. And by 1943 it had devised a World Currency Stabilization Program. The Treasury's post-war money plan had two parts. The first part was a $10 billion United Nations Bank for Reconstruction and Development, in other words, the World Bank. The second part was an $8 billion International Stabilization Fund, which people now know as the IMF. The author of both proposals was Harry White, whose plan for the post-war international monetary system was endorsed by the 42 countries attending the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. And with the Bretton Woods Agreement signed, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were created. Now, the Harry White who designed the final version of the IMF and World Bank was the same Harry White that was on the OSS Advisory Committee and managed the operations of the ESF. The point here is that White wasn't a banker, an economist, or a monetary expert. He was an ESF spook. His area of expertise was slush funds and financing covert operations. This was not the person you wanted to design the international monetary system. The Bretton Woods system, which made the dollar into the world's reserve currency, was shaped by the Exchange Stabilization Fund. You see, during World War II, White worked on plans for an inter-American bank, the aim of which was to frustrate Nazi penetration of Latin America. In other words, a slush fund, like the ESF, to finance covert operations. The plans for an inter-American bank did not materialize. However, they inspired the creation of the IMF and World Bank. White designed the IMF to operate along ESF lines. The ESF's own money was then transferred to the IMF, to which other countries made their own contributions. Finally, White took control of this giant pile of money by becoming the first head of the IMF. The ESF, through White, created a giant stabilization fund in its own image. The Bretton Woods IMF and World Bank were a camouflage method of lending billions of American dollars abroad. It was called foreign aid, although in some cases the countries involved didn't even know they were receiving any aid. Using these devices for draining savings out of the U.S., the ESF went wild financing CIA Cold War activities. And the one coordinating all these IMF and World Bank loans was the ESF. The ESF finances covert operations and then gets repaid from the IMF or the World Bank. Like the Gold Reserve Act, Bretton Woods was a guaranteed disaster, which was fiercely opposed by anyone with any banking experience. Bankers had fundamental objections to the Bretton Woods proposals, including their fears about what might happen to the dollar. American bankers were so critical of the Bretton Woods plan that the Treasury had to launch a propaganda campaign to get the agreement signed, and our international banking system was created without the input from real bankers. Donations welcome. For this particular video, I've actually purchased quite a few old papers and articles. This video has also taken months of my time to prepare, so any donations would be appreciated. Running the black budget, as is explained in Operation Rollback. The heart and soul of covert operations is the provision of unvouchered funds and the inviolability of such funds from outside inspection. In other words, untraceable, unaccountable cash. The ESF, with its extravagant freedom from scrutiny enshrined in law, was nothing short of ideal for funding secret operations. That's why, after World War II, when U.S. covert operations were transferred to the Office of Policy Coordination, the new head of the OPC, Frank Wisner, turned to the ESF for financing. Wisner's first plan of action to defeat the Communists in the April 1948 Italian elections was funded by $10 million provided by the ESF. The millions were delivered to Italian politicians in suitcases filled with cash. So it was a slush fund established to stabilize the dollar that started the United States on the first covert operations of the Cold War. It is important to understand here that the ESF runs the U.S.'s black budget. The ESF takes in cash from a variety of sources and then funnels that money to covert operations. Here's an example. In 1941, the War Powers Act authorized the U.S. Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund to serve as a holding pool for captured Nazi valuables. This pool of money became a secret source of financing for U.S. clandestine operations in the early days of the CIA. And that's how the ESF runs the black budget. Sources of ESF cash include the gold confiscated from U.S. citizens, IMF and World Bank loans, money siphoned from the Marshall Plan, appropriations buried in the budgets of other agencies, and income from illicit activities like drug trafficking. All U.S. intelligence agencies have been financed by this cash. The ESF is involved in everything the CIA does. More importantly, the ESF is capable of running its own covert operations. After all, the ESF has the unreviewable authority to engage in covert actions in international finance, and has been funding covert efforts since before the CIA's existence. Consider this. The CIA operates under some legal restrictions. There are no legal restrictions on the ESF. The CIA has been investigated by Congress multiple times. The ESF has never been investigated by Congress. It should be obvious that nastiest stuff will be done by the ESF itself, and that America's darkest secrets are buried where Congress never looks and never asks questions.
Links to all 5 parts will be posted in the show's summary for those really interested in the topic and who are wanting to jump ahead. The series will continue next week. CVN has reported previously on a lawsuit that has been filed in Canada against the government for selling out the Bank of Canada to the Rothschilds banking cartel, effectively enslaving all Canadians to the control of the criminally fraudulent fractional reserve system of banking since 1974, through a decision made by the former Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current Canadian Prime Minister. The Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, also known as COMER, will be appearing in court again on December the 7th. According to the COMER website, COMER is an international publishing and education resource based in Toronto, Canada, and is comprised of people who are concerned about the destabilizing effects current economic and monetary policies have had and are having on the citizens of Canada and other countries. Comer argues for prices in a mixed economy, economic reform, and advocates for changes in monetary policy, monetary reform, through revisions in the Bank of Canada Act. The Journal of the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform was launched as Comer Comments in 1988. Its purpose was to study the strange turn that monetary policy was taking under the aggressive leadership of the world's central banks, and, in particular, the 1991 proclamation of John Crow, then Governor of Bank of Canada, who declared zero inflation to be the primary concern of the central bank. The case was originally filed on December of 2011, and according to the original court filing, the defendant parties named in the action include Queen Elizabeth, the Attorney General of Canada, the Bank of Canada, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of National Revenue. Comer's lawyer, Rocco Galati, has invited members of the public to come to the courthouse to show support for the case, so those living in the Toronto area may wish to appear to learn more about how Canadians were forced into debt slavery without their informed democratic consent. In the Constitution for the Comer organization, there are perhaps several points worth noting. Article 2 in their declaration reads, "Organized at a 1986 conference of the Eastern Economic Association held in Washington, D.C., Comer is an economic think tank based in Toronto. Comer was founded by Dr. John Hargrove Hudson, economics from the University of Waterloo, and William Krem. Comer is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan, volunteer-based association of individuals and organizations concerned about the money system and related issues. We share the concern that the fractional reserve banking system, which creates money as a debt and destroys money when the debt is repaid, is an unsustainable system. Comer is dedicated to understanding the connection between the debt-money system and critical social issues. Comer is a forum encouraging critical thinking about sustainable monetary and economic policies designed to serve the common good." Article 2 in their statement of purpose reads, "Comer advocates democratic monetary and economic policies that recognize public ownership over the monetary system. Comer stresses the obligation of the government to use that system to sustain the environment and to serve society." Its principles, Article 12 reads, 1. People and the environment must take priority over financial capital. 2. Everyone has a right to adequate purchasing power. 3. Wage and debt slavery must end. 4. The government must create the purchasing power required to fund its operations. 5. Poverty must be eliminated. And 6. Cooperation, not competition, must inform our efforts. Article 14 in their vision reads, "A just political economy that is based on sound democratic principles, designed to enhance all life and dedicated to the public interest rather than private profit." For those who have some understanding of legal language, a copy of the full revised statement of claim can be found in the links in the show summary for this story. Those who are following this and who choose to take action can send this information to their local media across Canada in the hopes that at least a few of them will begin to pick up on this story. Details about the location of the court case will be posted in the show summary as well for those wanting to attend. In general news, I recently commented on how, in the movie Avatar, nature came to the rescue of the indigenous population on a planet that was being exploited by humans for profit. Nature seems to find ways to balance itself out, and if humans get in the way, then it is possible that there will be some consequences. Another example of this comes from Australia this week. An article appearing on the nativestoday.com website from November 25th reported the following. Drones operated by one of the world's largest gold mining companies are being destroyed by native eagles, costing the company thousands of dollars. Mining is obviously extremely destructive to the natural environment. The article writes that gold mining is particularly destructive as its waste carries mercury and cyanide, which are typically used to extract gold from rock. These potent neurotoxins persist in the environment, poisoning the soil and contaminating water supplies permanently. Gold mining also releases hundreds of tons of elemental mercury into the air annually. In addition, this type of mining is considered particularly destructive because of its wastefulness. Over 20 tons of rock and soil must be treated and then dislodged to produce enough gold for a single ring. Recently, in the U.S., the toxic consequences of gold mining were on full display when the Environmental Protection Agency's incompetence in cleaning out an abandoned gold mine turned the Animas River orange after heavy metal-laden mining waste drained into the river. Before this tragic accident, the EPA had reported that 40% of western U.S. watersheds had been permanently contaminated by mining. It is for this reason that the water protectors are responding in service to humanity and the planet. It also appears that nature is beginning to answer the call as well. The article continues. Drones that are used to survey the territory around gold mines are being destroyed by native wedge-tailed eagles. Rick Stephen, a mine surveyor in the region, said that he had lost 9 of his Trimble UX-5 drones to eagles, which he labeled the natural enemy of drones. After the attacks began, Stephen camouflaged his drones as baby eagles. However, the ruse only worked temporarily, as 50 flights later, the eagles realized the disguised drones were not what they seemed. Each of these drones costs an impressive $20,000, meaning that the gold mining companies are losing money fast thanks to the eagles' intervention. One of these companies, Gold Fields, has already lost over $100,000. It is no longer a secret that North American security forces have been training eagles to take down drones that are used to spy upon them. To be fair, it is unclear in this article whether the eagles were specifically trained, although drones appear to be the natural enemy of eagles, according to Stephen moments ago. It is unclear whether this is actually true or not. Regardless, it is symbolic that the battle against corporate mining and the contamination of water is happening in other parts of the world, and attention is being drawn to the importance of the protection of the water supply that is needed to keep humanity alive. The global cabal, in its desperation to maintain its power, needs to contaminate the water, knowing that people depend upon it, to keep them sick, so that people will focus instead on their health and not on the criminal activities that they are seeking to protect. This makes the actions of the water protectors that much more valuable and honorable. Over to science news now. There are some who may wonder whether the mind has the capacity for influencing matter. For most listeners to CVN, this is simply a no-brainer, for most have enough of an understanding to accept that we live in an energetic universe, and that everything is energy, and thus energy has the potential to affect other energies around it. The Global Consciousness Project is one such initiative attempting to scientifically measure and quantify this relationship. Dr. Dean Radin is Chief Scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, and Associated Distinguished Professor of Integral and Transpersonal Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. In this video from 2008, Radin explains more about this Global Consciousness Project and its potential implications to our current understanding of science and human existence.
The Global Consciousness Project is an evolutionary step out of 50 years of prior experiments. The experiments were looking at the relationship between mind and matter, and specifically intention and the behavior of the physical world. I mean, it all devolves back into the question, what is the role of mind in the physical world? From a Western science point of view, there isn't much. I, as a designer of a car, can get an internal image and an intention to build a car, and eventually a car appears. But that's not a direct link. It requires a lot of work between the intention and the building of a car. But this question is saying more that, is there a direct link between one's intention and the behavior of the world? But an unmediated link, or if mediated, we don't know by what yet. Well, those experiments typically would use very sensitive physical systems, and then you would ask somebody to direct their intention at it and try to push the system around, make it do this versus that. So a prototype example is flip a coin and wish for heads, and now flip a coin, wish for tails. And you can do that experiment, and it has been done many times, and what you see after loads of data is that the statistics of the system that you're working with are biased in the direction that you want the intention to go. Coins are an okay system to work with, but as mechanical things are very difficult to track precisely. So electronic circuits started to be used in the 1960s, where it did the equivalent of coin flipping. It only was flipping bits, random bits. And it could produce bits very quickly, and all of the bits could be recorded precisely. And so you could do an experiment where you have a random number generator going, and you ask somebody to mentally force it to create more ones and zeros, and then now create more zeros and ones, and now let the thing run all by itself as a calibration condition. And what you find after very long period studies like this and meta-analyses looking at many studies by many different people, that there are biases that show up in the randomness. The systems that should be random are no longer behaving randomly. So that's about 50 years worth of study. Then in the 1990s, Roger Nelson at Princeton got the idea that maybe intention was only a piece of the puzzle, and maybe attention was also important. That the act of attending, which when we think of internally, attending is a kind of coherent mental state. You're focusing in on one thing. If we can think of that as not simply being in your head, but being out there as well, then when you attend to something, it changes. And it changes in the direction of coherence. So if the target of your attention is randomness, then a cohered random system is, by definition, more orderly, becomes ordered. And so you can detect that order through statistics easily. So he started doing experiments where he'd take a random number generator, an electronic circuit, and put it in the vicinity of a group that was meditating, thinking that this would create a large amount of coherent attention. Sometimes people knew the random generator was there, and sometimes they didn't know. And he wanted to see whether the randomness would become orderly during the meditation. After hundreds of such tests by Roger and me and a bunch of our colleagues, we came to the conclusion that it does become less random in a context where we can infer that there's mental coherence going on. Sometimes due only to attention. I think it was 1994 I did an experiment before, during, and after the announcement of the O.J. Simpson verdict in his murder trial. This was a unique period in history in that it was the first time that I'm aware of, in modern time anyway, where hundreds of millions of people around the world knew that something interesting was going to happen at a stroke of a couple of seconds in the future. It was a reading of a verdict which would either say guilty or not guilty. And so imagine the amount of attention that's slowly focusing up to that moment. I figured this would make a great experiment because I could have a whole bunch of random number generators going, and we can look in time sequence what is happening to the randomness as we approach the moment of announcement of the verdict, where we have maybe 1 billion people paying attention to it. So I did that. I had 5 random number generators going, 4 in the US and 1 in Europe, and tracked what was happening to the randomness as we got closer and closer to the verdict and the verdict being read and afterwards. And we found very clear evidence that there was a sudden peak in order in the random generators within seconds of the verdict being read. And of course it was being read live and carried around the world on radio and television all over the place, so it was a live event worldwide. So Roger and I and a few colleagues were discussing this. We later had another instance where Princess Diana was killed in a car crash, and her funeral was scheduled a week in advance. So we figured we can use that as another example of lots of attention around the world for one event. And we got, I think, 12 of us around the world got our random number generators going, and we analyzed the result. And again, was significant deviation from randomness towards order during the period of the funeral, when lots of people were watching. And we thought, well, this is great. This is an interesting experiment, but we had to go through a lot of work to get everybody to participate at the same time. So we decided to create a system that would be completely automatically running 24/7 with random number generators located in places around the world. The reason we did this is because we knew that events would occur that we couldn't predict, that would attract a lot of attention. We wanted to see what would happen under those cases. The best example and the worst case was 9/11. 9/11 was not predicted as far as most people knew, and we had 37 random number generators, maybe 36 or 37 running at that time, and we were then able to look and see what was happening to randomness before, during, and after 9/11. We subsequently, a bunch of us did an analysis, and we published it in Foundations of Physics Letters, which is a physics journal, because what we found was unmistakable evidence that the randomness in all 36 generators went away. Slightly before 9/11, at 9/11, a little bit after, and then it went back to baseline. So you have a baseline randomness statistically. You have 9/11 approaching about 2 or 3 hours before 9/11. The whole system, the whole random system became orderly. And then 9/11 occurred, and it went through all kinds of strange random or non-random effects, and then it balanced out after a while and went back to being orderly. This is one of now over 200 such events, things like gigantic tsunamis, earthquakes, political events, the death of celebrities, unexpected things. Those kind of events go into our database. And what we do then is we have this ongoing, continuous random stream from around the world. We have a formal way of saying, well, this event is either predicted or an event occurs, and we go back later and we analyze the result through a standard method that we use, and we can see whether this worldwide random system is behaving randomly or not. And when you look at composite over the 200-some events, the odds against chance are over 1,000,000 to 1 now. So we have good statistical reasons to believe that the random generators are not behaving randomly when there are large-scale events that attract a lot of attention.
James Redfield wrote in The Celestine Prophecy that where attention goes, energy flows. A more recent video featuring Dr. Quantum looks at the double slit experiment and how the experiment changed when the atoms being fired through the double slit changed their behavior once a camera was used to observe. The act of attention changed a potential outcome. Is it, therefore, any surprise that the global cabal is so desperately trying to keep people sick, in fear, and in separation from each other? Imagine what the collective consciousness could do. In fact, look even now what the collective consciousness is beginning to do, as more crimes by the cabal continue to get exposed and as people come to understand how they have been criminally enslaved to debt and a fraudulent legal system. The cabal is desperate to keep the collective consciousness from uniting against them, and right now it is beginning to fail. Those who say they can't do anything to change the world are sadly mistaken. For every soul that awakens to what is going on and focuses on the co-creation of something better for humanity and the planet can help to dismantle the control that has dominated humans and the planet for our entire current lifetime. For any interested, one website has a real-time, color-coded dot that reflects the current variance in human consciousness, and that link will appear in the show summary. As well, a link to more of the scientific information will also be offered for those interested in the science behind it. Finally, in health-related news, as you will hear in a few moments in this week's final words, the detox process moves along in waves, whether it be the macro, universal, global level, or whether it be the micro level within one's own body. This process is as unique to the individual as the life path that one has been called to serve at this time. The modalities of healing, therefore, will also be unique to each individual, and there is never a cure-all solution, despite what numerous healers will tell you as they attempt to market their treatments, books, videos, or whatever else. I did a couple of cleansings many years ago, back when I still had my multinational corporate past life. The experience was great then, and this is why I feel it's so important to continue this practice, perhaps especially coming to the end of a 9-year cycle. I need to be the best I can be in this moment, and as I have been emphasizing recently, it is becoming more important for people to focus on their bodies, their health, and their respective truths for service in these rapidly changing times. I've been so very fortunate to connect with some wonderful people here and also some others who are extremely knowledgeable in their particular modalities of healing. As part of the program here, the morning yoga, access to a steam room, and a single 1-hour massage every day is included in the price, as also included an ozone treatment as well. Among other treatments offered are Reiki, cupping, and acupuncture. One individual who visits this location frequently also offers sound and light therapy and more in sessions customized to the needs of the individual. Science has already determined that water has the capacity to remember and also to be encoded. Light has also been shown to be capable of carrying vast amounts of information. Depending upon the individual and her or his readiness to experience these modalities, the body has the potential to experience shifts on multiple levels. Dmitry Mitev, along with his wife, have a website, purenatureyoga.com, where they explain the modalities of healing that they offer. Walking into the session room, one observes a very large collection of Tibetan and crystal bowls. As well, there are crystals, a symphonic gong, and a particular light device which I will come to in a moment. Mitev trained in yoga, Tibetan sound therapy, qigong, Reiki, cranial sacral treatments, shamanic healing, integrated vibrational therapy, and also the Ajna light therapy. Ajna light therapy is a light healing device co-created by Guy Harriman, who has his own healing center in Chiang Mai in the northern part of Thailand. In this audio clip, Harriman explains a bit about the device itself.
The light is based on the flicker effect, which we know was used by the Egyptians, the Greeks and the Romans. And the flicker effect changes the way your mind works, processes very quickly. You're always running certain frequencies in the brain. It just allows you to naturally shift from one to the other. The most interesting one is when you're stressed, like most people are in their daily lives. It can take you out of that, we call that a beta state, high beta state, take you out of that into deeply relaxed or deep meditation state, or very visual state. So if you choose to try the light, it'll be a journey of inner exploration. First of all, just through relaxation. Any meditation is a relaxation. And maybe you feel, oh, I can't meditate, that's too hard. I haven't studied for so many years and I don't know how to stop my mind thinking. With the light, you allow whatever comes up to come up. It's perfectly fine to be thinking under the light. I think a lot. So in all my practice is active meditation. So all of those things come up under the light, and we can use this for intentional healing, self-healing, light self-therapy, as we call it. It's not guided by another person. It's not about giving our power away. It's about taking our power back into our heart. The light will manifest all sorts of healing energies in your body on a body level. There are certain patterns I've seen, because now 2,000 plus people have been on the light, and a very clear pattern of evolution, but the light meets you wherever you are. If you're very stuck in your life and very down on yourself, that's fine. If you try to meditate, it's impossible. If you relax and see what's going on, just be an observer under the stimulation, you'll have certain experiences. So people have done a lot of meditation work themselves. The light acts as an accelerator. So in my case, I've done 35 years of yoga, 20 years of qigong. Every day, I do many hours of practice. Most people have not had the luxury of having that. The light meets you where you are, and it's like a walking stick if you're climbing up a mountain. You can walk up the mountain without the stick. You absolutely don't need it. The tool is just there for you. And the light is like that. It's not imposing something from the outside. It's just something to help you accelerate, make it easier for you to go inside.
Mitev, who also has experience as a trainer for this particular device, shares a little bit more in his own words about the use of this particular modality.
The Ajna Light was developed in 2014 to help people explore the intimate connection with the wisdom of the universe, using flickering lights that helps you go into deep meditative states. It connects to your root of your soul wisdom in a harmonious, natural, powerful way in balance with your own physiology. Basically, it works with brainwave entrainment, and once you're brainwave entrained, it may take you into different states of consciousness. Different states of consciousness include delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, and lambda. As the light flickers, it flickers at different intensities. Light flickers between 0 and 4 hertz, it's a delta state. If it flickers between 4 and 8 hertz, it's a theta state. When it flickers between 8 and 12 hertz, it's the alpha state. And 12 to 33 is the beta state. The beta state is the state that we're in now, which is generally the reasoning, the questioning, the answering. It's actually the quite stressful state. And then you have gamma, which is 33 and above, and then lambda, which is very high flickering. But generally, on the light, we induce a gamma, theta, alpha, or beta state. Various trials worldwide, many people have spent much time on the light. So basically the light helps you release a very deep relaxed state, and once your body is relaxed, then there is less stress. The less stress, the less anxiety, and therefore they'll start to activate the self-healing mechanisms within the body. True healing happens when we relax into the process of letting go of the ego, and allowing an unconscious mind to guide us into a deep state. The power of self-healing is revealed in trance state of gamma, theta, delta brainwave states, allowing old traumas held in the body's memory to naturally release in a non-verbal, non-judgmental way under the guidance of your own wisdom.
In just a few moments, I will share a bit about one experience I had while having a session with this particular modality. For those who have never worked with or had experience in working with the energies of bowls and sound, Mitaf shares a little bit more about this particular modality.
Everything in the universe is vibration and sound. We're all vibrating on a molecular level. The fundamental state of the universe is a state of bliss. Our core state, because they're also part of the natural universe, is one of bliss and great ease. Matter is actually energy vibrating at different rates, and then by altering the rate of vibration, we can change the structure of matter. Basically, illness is a manifestation of disharmony in the body, an imbalance in the cells and in the given organs. Healing can be achieved by restoring the normal vibration or frequency that is diseased out of harmony and out of the different parts of the body. Vibrational healing, especially with sound, is a potent way of restoring the body to its normal frequency. The most effective healing sounds are produced by singing bowls, Tibetan singing bowls. They generally nudge us back to our natural state of bliss. So the Tibetan singing bowls, 5,000 years old, originated in India, went to Tibet, so they're known as Tibetan singing bowls. Some of them are made from 7 metals, but the main 2 metals, copper and tin. Copper is a representation of love and is connected to the planet of Venus. Tin is a representation of wisdom and is connected to the planet of Jupiter. Love is wisdom is all that we need, because once we really open our heart and connect to a higher knowing, then this is why these bowls are so powerful. Generally, Tibetan singing bowls work with 5 chakras, but we do have 7 chakras. There are 7 energy centers. Certain bowls act at certain frequency and certain tones that resonate with certain parts of the body, which is a resonant frequency with the body. For example, we have a bowl that works with the reproductive system, so it has a resonant frequency with those organs of the body. We have I also have a bowl that resonates with the digestive system, which is more of the water element, which resonates with the kidney and urinary bladder, and also the liver. I have an ancient set which works with post-traumatic stress disorders, people from past traumas from the past, also people that were suffering from illnesses, and also helps with quick recovery from cancer or operations. I have bowls for digestive, headaches, migraine, joint pains, quite a lot of issues. So singing bowls particularly are very much for healing. Crystal bowls, gongs, very much help you go into a very deep state of relaxation, maybe to take you on a journey, a shamanic journey. It really relaxes you. And again, the more relaxed you are, then just when the self-healing mechanisms of the body start to activate. But why the singing bowls are so special, because different bowls are designed and made to different frequencies and different tones that resonate with different parts of the body to actually release toxins and also nourish the body. And this is where the really deeper healing takes place. So within a session, my session will incorporate not just the singing bowls itself. I really feel that as a healer, I don't heal myself. The person heals themselves. I'm a mediator, I'm a medium to help them believe in themselves and help them to connect much deeper on their level. So within a session, I really feel that the bowls work at a certain vibration and vibrational therapy that work on much deeper on the molecular level to release any toxins, to nourish the body, to remove negativities, and just sort of build the spiritual vitality of the body. So within the treatment, some people may resonate with, for example, I may incorporate craniosacral therapy, which helps people go into a very deep state. May even incorporate some Reiki. I can use crystals. I use shakers that disperse energy. I have a thunder drum. I use a shamanic drum, which induces a theta state. I also use a range of tuning forks, which is all the different frequencies that also really helps to release toxins in the body, that resonates to raise the vibration in the body. And more importantly, I also like to start my session getting the person or my client to connect to something higher than themselves. So I say a little receptive prayer to make them a little bit more receptive, as well as being experienced as a Qigong practitioner and doing Tai Chi for the last 20 or 30 years, and as well as being a yoga teacher and also studying yoga therapy. I combine all my modalities to give the most beneficial to what will be most beneficial for my client at this particular time.
In one of several sessions I had with Mitef, I was put through 20 minutes of fast, deep breathing through the mouth only, and this left my body buzzing. I was then given about 15 to 20 minutes on the Ajna light, and I have to say that this light was absolutely wild. Patterns appearing all over the place. What was exciting for me personally, however, was a moment when a rectangle kind of shape appeared in the midst of all the light, shapes, and colors. This box became a screen. In this screen, I saw a film strip. For those who remember those old film strips that have the holes along both sides of the strip, inside I began to see individual slides with images on them. I could not identify exactly what I saw, but there were buildings and locations, and in some of the slides there were words, sometimes in English and sometimes in what looked like another language, or perhaps multiple languages. Perhaps I was seeing scenes from a past life. This was absolutely wild for me. After this, the bowls and the symphonic gong were then used at different locations around my body that focused on my body's needs, and my body was still buzzing to some degree from the breathwork earlier. The range of modalities employed by Mitef in a single session is what impressed me. I have not come across very many healers with this range and a sincere desire to just help people. He and his wife have further visions to open up centers where people can do breathing meditation retreats, because, in Mitef's words, this is where the real healing takes place. Before that can happen, however, healing requires a conscious choice by the individual, and this can only happen when the individual is ready. Just before I get into this week's final words, I really need to give a shout out to two incredible people who shared the fasting cleansing experience with me. I have not contacted them for permission to mention their names, and I know the man prefers not to have his name shared in situations like this, based on discussions we previously had while fasting together. When one makes a conscious decision to do something, and makes a commitment to do it, it is said that the universe will begin to conspire to make it happen. I was so very grateful that I received the initial funds from my mother to do this trip, but you can imagine my utter surprise when I went to pay my bill for this current location to find out that a very significant contribution had already been made towards my stay and my treatments. There are times when amazing angels come along and bring with them a little gift that helps to restore a bit of validation in one's service. This couple has done several acts of philanthropy here at the resort, including helping one female employee who has not seen her child in about 7 years, and they shared funds to pay for a flight for her to go and see her child. It is amazing to come across such incredibly generous, kind, and thoughtful people such as this couple. To this couple, I say that you are both completely amazing, and I am so humbled and honored to have crossed your paths, and I thank you both profoundly from the bottom of my heart for sharing some of that abundance with me. With love and gratitude, I so very much salute and honor you. I am creating that I will, in turn, be able to pay it forward and also perhaps share something with them in a future moment of now. In this week's final words, I'm realizing more now that it was no coincidence that I was drawn to do this physical cleansing of my body at this time. We are preparing for momentous times and changes, and considering the fact that if one adds the numbers of 2016 together, the answer becomes 9, and in numerology this symbolizes the end of a 9-year cycle. 2017 becomes a 1 year, the beginning of a new cycle, and in this sense one should not be surprised to see so many events happening at this time, and so many things being exposed on a more public scale, even if most people are not yet able to connect the dots between the different events playing out. There are those who would say the world is falling apart, and there are those who say that everything is being exposed for cleansing, healing, and transformation. For those who say the world is falling apart, there are two subgroups to this. There are those who will just continue to exist in their negativity and their poor me control dramas and surrender to their fate. And there is the other group that sees the lessons that are meant to come from this and are actively engaging people and solutions to help transform that. In the show summary for these final words, I will include a video from Jocelyn Daur from earlier this year that includes a domino demonstration that effectively demonstrates how one person can begin to make a large contribution in the world. Both groups are correct in their perceptions. The question becomes what those people are willing to do with those perspectives. In order to make space for the new, we have to be willing to release the old. This applies on a global level, and it also applies within one's own physical body. An article appearing on the High Heart Life blog on November 27th by Denise LaFay describes November as being a difficult month for having old patterns shattered. Again, this is happening on a global level and within each individual. I can say this for me personally, at least. LaFay describes how there is more photonic light on the planet at this time and how it is affecting profound shifts in the DNA of every human being, and that these changes have been more intense during November and will continue through December as we finish this 9-year and begin a new cycle next year. One symptom she describes is a sense or feeling that your DNA is evolving in new and different ways from previous years. This is connected to the third and final 9-energy cycle of 2016. And our bodies and DNA have been going through some very big evolutionary changes all year, but very much so just in November and even more throughout December of 2016. She later adds that it's been a tough month, but this is just what it is at this point within the evolutionary ascension process. The more willing we are to release the old, everything, and step into the new, even when we don't see it yet, the easier and faster this process will be for everyone. Individuals are going to react to all of this differently based on their uniquely different, equally beautiful purpose for being here. There are many souls who are feeling extremely tired at this time, and I believe I am one of them based on what I have been personally feeling. One explanation offered that may feel better for some more than others comes from an article from 2014 entitled Old Souls and the Completion of the Incarnation Cycle, posted on the Humans Are Free website around November 28th. This article tries to explain the various stages of soul growth. The article writes that in the first stage, as an infant soul, it learned about physical existence, life and death, and the need for nurturing. In the second stage, as a baby soul, it learned about society, culture, and community, the need for structure, belonging, and playing a role. In the third stage, as a young soul, it learned about free will and self-determination, taking charge of its own destiny, rising to the challenge. And in the fourth stage, as a mature soul, it learned about coexistence and interrelatedness, taking responsibility for its relationships, honoring difference, and otherness. At last, the soul is ready for the final leg of the journey, the return to unity and the end of reincarnation. Those undergoing the fifth and final stage of reincarnation are known as old souls. In this stage of soul evolvement, there is a search for balance and completion, and an urge to pass on the torch before the end of reincarnation. In commenting about old souls in particular, the article writes, old souls become more relaxed, laid back and detached in life. Human existence is familiar and manageable, and there are not so many problems or issues to deal with. The main issues, in fact, are existential rather than material or psychological. Doing their own thing, old souls end up pursuing nothing but their own path, whilst allowing others to pursue theirs, just perfecting their own abilities, being themselves in life to the best that they can. Many do so through artistic, humanitarian, or philosophical endeavors, though for many, their greatest form of self-fulfillment can be something as mundane as gardening. Work, rest, and play all become the same thing. A potential difficulty for old souls is lapsing into apathy, no longer caring about life and the world. As the physical plane begins to lose its allure, the incarnate soul can show signs of being world-weary, even from birth. It is perhaps no surprise, at least to me anyway, why I felt called to do this health cleansing at this time. It is perhaps amazing in one sense when one is able to grasp, even in a small sense, how everything is connected on both a larger macroscopic level, such as a planetary and galactic affair, and a microscopic level, such as within one's body. How might one recognize the difference? The article shares that old souls tend to emanate a calm, steady quality that has substance, depth, or gravitas. In comparison, young souls can appear frantic and superficial, while mature souls seem perpetually stressed and assailed by life. You can often hear it in the voice. Young souls tend to talk loud and fast. Mature souls have a sort of soft tone laced with uncertainty, while old souls tend to have a slow, deep voice, relaxed, assured, and unhurried. We can apply what is currently happening around the world with what is happening also within the physical body, and I can perhaps best explain by describing a bit of what I am personally experiencing during this health cleansing. As we witness the awakening of humanity around the world and the growing fear of the elitists who are desperately trying to maintain their control, we see also more attempts by those elitists to create fear, discomfort, chaos, and even war as they try to regain their power and control. Their resistance continues to make things very uncomfortable for the people, but if the will of the people is strong enough, as it appears to be in many places around the world, the elitists are experiencing defeats at various levels. Having done a cleansing detox program years ago while working for a multinational company, I knew what to expect. The energies, however, are much different this time. As I am moving through this process, I am witnessing the removal of many parasites from my body that have accumulated from years of Western foods, some processed, sugar, wheat, and everything else. Granted, I have not eaten as much processed food as many other people, but it is still there. Despite one's best attempts to live a clean and healthy lifestyle in the Western world, even so-called healthy foods are no longer healthy. As the purging process begins, the parasites detect that their world is now under attack. They are feeling threatened. Their reaction, naturally, is to try to protect themselves. Therefore, they send out signals or toxins to try to make the host body feel really bad so that one will give up on the cleanse and go back to eating or doing what the parasites need to continue existing. Even though there are days I feel really great, there are also come days when I am feeling really down and I barely feel like moving. The parasites within one's body react in much the same way we are seeing the global elitists react on a global level. As the purging of the parasites continues, assuming one is strong enough to go through the discomforting feelings of the parasites attempting to save themselves, the reward is on the other side, and this is what keeps me going. If humanity has the will and drive to see through the chaos, the false flag events, and the attempts to separate humanity and that keep them in debt and in fear, then humanity has the opportunity to co-create a better future in defeating the parasites currently enslaving humanity and destroying our planet for profit, power, and control. A cleansing has begun, and I choose to create that it will be Earth's and humanity's chance to start in a much cleaner energetic body for the new cycle beginning next year. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary available on the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Minds page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that by shifting your energy towards your highest service, you are helping to shift the energies of the planet to its highest service. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.